to admit it, because we are influenced by our environment, and the environment he came from, albeit from a Catholic and Protestant point of view, is whoever the enemy is, we have to kill the enemy. The enemy at that particular time happened to be black, but it equally could have been English, and he would have wanted to kill any Englishman. So, but those holier than thou who says how terrible it is, it's a disgrace.
People even said John Barnes couldn't play for anything. Jamie Carragher watched the same footage, but the story he tells is completely opposite. That's because this is about what Premier League legends actually revealed about their most dangerous opponent, their most unplayable teammate. The truth might shock you because it flips everything you thought you knew about this Liverpool icon. Quick one before we go further. If you're enjoying this story about one of football's most misunderstood geniuses, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. It really helps these football stories reach more people and ensures creators keep digging into the stuff that really matters. John Barnes was born in Kingston, Jamaica. His father was Colonel Ken Barnes, a high-ranking military officer. There was a misconception that Caribbean players lacked discipline. Barnes has been clear his father's influence created strict routine and 100% commitment. When John was 9 and chose football over swimming training, his father ended his swimming career. The message was crystal clear. If you're not doing something properly, you don't do it at all. When the family moved to London in 1975, Barnes carried that structured mindset into Middlesex League football with Sudbury Court. His path into professional football was serendipitous. A taxi driver noticed his talent and recommended him to Watford. The trial led to Barnes signing for the club in exchange for a set of kits. This would become one of the most profitable investments in football history. What happened next at Watford became the physical crucible that would define his entire career. Graham Taylor was building something extraordinary at Watford, taking the club from 4th Division to 1st Division in 5 years. Taylor's system prioritized fitness, pressing, and a direct style of football. This environment forced Barnes to develop the stamina and upper body strength required to survive in the brutal, high-impact football of the early 1980s. When Barnes debuted at 17 against Oldham Athletic in 1981, he quickly became a regular. That season, he scored 12 goals as Watford secured promotion to the top flight. The following year, Watford finished as runners-up for the league title, only behind Liverpool. For a newly promoted side to challenge for the title was almost unparalleled. Fans and rivals started noticing something different about this winger. At the end of the 1986-87 season, it was obvious Barnes had outgrown Vicarage Road. Graham Taylor departed to Aston Villa, and his successor, Dave Bassett, recognised immediately that Barnes was destined for a major club. What happened next is one of the most significant what-if moments in Premier League history. Bassett proactively offered Barnes to Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United before the player's eventual move to Anfield. This wasn't some rumour or idle speculation. Martin Edwards, former United chairman, confirmed in his autobiography that Graham Taylor personally telephoned Ferguson to offer him the chance to sign John Barnes. At that time, Manchester United were entering a period of reconstruction under Ferguson, who was in his first full season at Old Trafford. Despite the obvious talent on display, Ferguson declined the offer. His reasoning was rooted in loyalty to existing personnel. He had Jesper Olsen as cover on the left wing and wanted to give the Danish international full opportunity to prove his worth in the new regime. This decision would haunt Ferguson for the rest of his career. By the end of 1988, Olsen had fallen out of favour and left the club entirely, while Barnes had already secured a league title and won the PFA Player of the Year award at Liverpool. United's subsequent attempts to fill the left-wing void involved signings like Ralph Milne and Danny Wallace, neither of whom came close to the heights required to challenge Liverpool's dominance. Ferguson himself later acknowledged that Barnes was the missing piece United needed to expedite their transition towards success, which ultimately took until 1993 to yield a league title. Barnes has noted that in 1987, Liverpool were the premier destination in English football at that time. Even if Ferguson had made an offer, he likely would have chosen Anfield because nobody would have turned down a chance to join the most dominant team in the country at that particular moment. The period between 1987 and 1990 became what legends refer to as the unplayable epoch of John Barnes. Jamie Carragher and Jamie Redknapp both frequently describe this specific period the most dominant window of any player's entire career. While fans and historians focus on the aesthetic beauty of his goals, fellow professionals remember something entirely different. They remember the frightening physical strength that made him a complete statistical anomaly on the wing. Carragher has stated plainly that Barnes was the best player in the country for a 3-year window, and Redknapp shares this view. Redknapp witnessed Barnes transition from the gazelle-like winger to the midfield general in real time. The secret to his dominance was a combination of attributes that rarely coexist in any athlete: the pace of a sprinter, the balance of a gymnast, and the upper body strength of a centre-back. Carragher notes that the defining image of Barnes was his ability to kill the ball stone dead with his left boot, while simultaneously riding a heavy tackle from a fullback defender. Opponents did not just fail to tackle him, they literally bounced off his solid frame. Carragher describes this as an immovable bastard, highlighting a biomechanical advantage Barnes possessed over traditional wingers of the era. Most wingers in the 1980s were lightweight and relied on acceleration to beat defenders. Barnes used his low centre of gravity and massive core strength to shield the ball in ways that seemed to violate the normal physics of the game entirely. He would dangle the ball like a carrot to entice the defender, then use his hip and shoulder to lock the defender out of the space as he turned. While predominantly left-footed, he was equally strong on his right foot, meaning defenders could not simply show him inside to neutralize the threat. Unusually for a winger, Barnes possessed unheralded strength in the air, allowing him to dominate fullbacks during cross-field diagonal balls. The 1987-88 season is cited as the pinnacle of English club football that era. Liverpool remained undefeated for their first 29 games, with Barnes providing the creative engine from the left wing. The 5-0 victory over Nottingham Forest on April 13, 1988, serves as the definitive showcase of this era. Tom Finney, a legend of the previous generation, described it as the finest exhibition of football he had ever seen. In that match, Barnes displayed cerebral brilliance that matched his physical power. He didn't just stay wide on the touchline, drifted infield to act as a playmaker in a tactical innovation by Kenny Dalglish that anticipated the modern inside-forward position. This fluidity allowed Barnes to link with Peter Beardsley in ways that confused traditional man-marking systems. Despite this dominance at club level, Barnes' England career remains a subject of intense debate among football legends like Gary Neville and Roy Keane. While he earned 79 caps, the general consensus is that the England setup failed completely to utilise his unplayable qualities. Barnes has explained that he felt significantly more comfortable playing for Liverpool than for England due to starkly different tactical philosophies. At Liverpool, the team was built on dominating possession and short passing. At England, the style was rooted in aggression and physical strength, rather than technical control. He received 20 to 30 touches per game at Liverpool, but only 5 to 10 touches per game for England. At Liverpool, he was a roaming playmaker from the left, with fluid movement alongside Beardsley and Aldridge. For England, he was a fixed-position left winger, isolated on the flank, with limited support. Barnes frequently cites Glenn Hoddle and Chris Waddle as the most technical players of his generation. He notes that Hoddle in particular was the greatest, most technical player England ever had, but was never fully appreciated or utilised. English football at that time valued track athletes over technicians. The secret frustration of Barnes's international career was the realisation that he was an accessory in a system that did not understand how to use his brain. The pressure during international matches was exacerbated by the 5-year ban on English clubs in Europe following the Heysel disaster. Because fans could not see his brilliance in the European Cup, they judged him almost exclusively on England performances. This created a testing and ultimately difficult relationship with national team fans, who craved the mazy dribbles of his 1984 goal against Brazil, but were presented with a player shackled by the rigid 4-4-2 instructions. In June 1992, during an England friendly against Finland, Barnes ruptured his Achilles tendon. This injury is widely regarded as the moment he lost his explosive, gazelle-like pace. The Achilles rupture at age 28 would have ended the career of most wingers who relied on pure speed. For Barnes, it forced a complete tactical reinvention. Manager Graham Souness was initially frustrated by Barnes's inability to replicate his pre-injury form. The transition to a deeper role was eventually embraced under Roy Evans, Souness's successor. This is where the most profound secret of John Barnes's longevity emerges, and it comes directly from Robbie Fowler. Fowler has stated that Barnes's secret post-injury was a footballing intelligence quotient so high he could dominate games from a deep midfield role, despite having almost no mobility remaining. In the mid-1990s, Barnes was reinvented within a 3-5-2 formation as a ball-playing, deep-lying central midfielder. Fowler notes that Barnes acted as an advanced sweeper, using his vision and experience to direct the younger Spice Boys generation, including Fowler himself, Steve McManaman, and Jamie Redknapp. His ability to anticipate play meant he did not need to outrun opponents, he simply outthought them every single time. This version of Barnes would sit deep, shield the defence, and launch attacks with calculated precision and strategic timing. Jan Molby has described Barnes as being so far ahead of his time in this midfield role. Molby, himself a legendary passer and midfielder, placed Barnes in his ultimate 11 alongside Johan Cruyff and Michel Platini, emphasising that Barnes played the game in his head entirely. The technical breakdown of this later role reveals a player who dictated pace by slowing the game down to suit his reduced mobility, forcing the opposition to play at his tempo. He provided the tactical foundation that allowed Steve McManaman to roam freely, essentially performing the defensive and distributive work that allowed the younger players to shine. Upon Ian Rush's departure, Barnes assumed the captaincy, a recognition of his peerless tactical leadership. But Barnes's career was played against a backdrop of significant social upheaval and racial hostility that cannot be glossed over. His ability to maintain a fantastic person persona, described by teammates as kind, funny, and always smiling despite this pressure, is a key part of his legend. One of the most iconic images of the 1980s is Barnes casually backheeling a banana off the pitch during a Merseyside derby. The way he handled this was through military stoicism and a structural understanding of racism. He argued that racism was societal indoctrination and refused to let the ignorance of the terraces affect his on-pitch performance. This resilience made him a pioneer and a hero to a generation of black players who watched him stand firm in an era when standing firm was dangerous. He eventually retired with more caps than any other black England player at that time. Following the Hillsborough disaster in 1989, Barnes was at the forefront of the club's community response. He attended numerous funerals and visited hospitals, even pulling out of an England international to fulfill these duties. Teammates remember this as the period where Barnes transitioned from being a star player to being the soul of the club itself. His performance in the 1989 FA Cup final, where he set up goals for Ian Rush, provided a respite for a grieving City at its most vulnerable moment. The discipline of the boot room was the final essential piece of the Barnes puzzle. Ronnie Moran, described as the sergeant major of the training ground, would use psychology to keep players grounded and honest about their performances. Barnes excelled in this environment because it matched his military upbringing perfectly. He accepted criticism as a means of improvement and never allowed his ego to eclipse the socialist nature of football, a philosophy he continues to champion decades later. The craziest part of all this is that John Barnes essentially had two completely separate and distinct careers. He was an unstoppable winger in his 20s, a player who defenders could not contain with traditional tactics. Then, after a career-ending injury that would have finished almost anyone else, he became a midfield brain who dominated the Premier League without the ball at his feet. When you tie together Ferguson's lingering regret about passing on him, Carragher and Redknapp insisting he was simply unplayable during those 3 years, and Fowler's revelation about his intelligence quotient being so high he could control matches while barely moving, you start to understand what people mean when they say the word legend. It is not just about trophies or highlights or beautiful goals, though Barnes had all of those. It is about being the kind of player who could single-handedly shift the balance of power in an entire league. People might throw lazy lines and old stereotypes around about Barnes and his capabilities. You might even hear someone claim he could not play, relying on outdated clips or their own incomplete understanding of the game. The players who actually shared a pitch with him, who felt the weight of his presence as an opponent, or the intelligence of his distribution as a teammate, tell a fundamentally different story. They tell the story of someone who was not just talented, but genuinely revolutionary in how he approached the position. They tell the story of someone who adapted, survived, and dominated across two completely different eras of football. That is the secret information Premier League legends revealed when they were honest and candid about John Barnes. And that is why the narrative about his ability and legacy matters so much more than the lazy takes and the outdated stereotypes that persist entirely. If you made it this far, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with your favourite John Barnes memory or moment you remember seeing. Thanks for watching.